The galaxy is a cold place, but it is not a quiet one. For eons, the silence of the stars was filled not by music, but by the rhythmic, heavy thrum of the Krell Empire's war drums. The Krell were not like us. They were a species born of a high-gravity world, built of chitin and cold logic. They viewed the universe as a ledger, a series of assets to be claimed or liabilities to be erased. Their king, a creature known as Malakor the Eternal, sat upon a throne carved from the husks of 1,000 conquered civilizations. To Malakor, peace was simply a word for the period between a demand and a surrender. When the Krell scouts first entered the Sol system, they didn't see a cradle of art, philosophy, or dreams. They saw a small blue marble inhabited by soft-skinned bipeds who spent more time arguing with each other than sharpening their blades. They saw a species that had only just begun to step beyond its own moon. I remember the day the Great Herald arrived. His ship was the size of a mountain, its hull shimmering with a dark, oily light that seemed to swallow the sun's rays. It sat in our orbit, a silent, suffocating presence that turned our tides and darkened our skies. The message wasn't delivered in a language we knew, yet every human on Earth heard it. It was a psychic resonance, a heavy, crushing weight in the back of our skulls. "I am Malakor," the voice echoed. "Your world is now a province of the Krell. You will provide 300 million laborers. You will surrender your heavy elements. You will dismantle your weapons. You will bow, or you will cease to exist." The world went still. For 24 hours, there was no traffic, no television broadcasts, no internet chatter, just the collective breath of 8 billion people, held in their lungs like a prayer. We were a divided species. We had wars of our own. We had borders and flags and ancient grudges. But in that moment, the Krell did something no human leader had ever managed to do. They gave us a single, common point of reference. They gave us a reason to look up.
Malakor sat in his palace on Krell-Prime, a world of jagged obsidian spires and purple lightning. He was surrounded by his generals, massive six-limbed warriors who had never known defeat. "The humans have sent a response, my king," the High Vizier hissed, clicking his mandibles in a gesture of amusement. Malakor didn't look up from his star maps. "Have they begun the shipments of ore? Have the first laborers been branded?" "No," the Vizier replied. "They sent a digital transmission. It is a single image, a map of our own sector, and a message that reads, 'We do not pay for what is ours. If you want our world, come and take it.'" The court erupted in a sound that was the Krell equivalent of laughter, a dry, rasping clicking. To them, it was like a blade of grass threatening a mower. Humans were soft. They required oxygen, water, and sleep. Their ships were held together by chemical rockets and hope. "They are primitives," decreed Malakor, his voice booming through the hall. "They mistake our mercy for hesitation. Send the vanguard, burn one of their cities, the one they call New York. Let the smoke of their defiance be the last thing they breathe." The Krell fleet moved. It was a machine of absolute destruction. They didn't use hyperlanes. They tore holes in reality itself. When they arrived back at Earth, they expected to find a planet in terror. Instead, they found nothing. The cities were there, glowing in the night, but the orbital space was empty. No defensive satellites, no desperate fighter wings. The Great Herald ship moved into position over the Atlantic, its primary beam charging with enough energy to boil an ocean. "Fire," commanded the vanguards. But the beam never left the ship. Deep within the belly of the Great Herald, a human named Elias Thorne sat in a maintenance crawl space. He wasn't a soldier, he was a systems architect who had spent the last 3 weeks hidden in a smuggling crate that had been captured by the Krell during their first raid. "You're doing great, Elias," he whispered to himself, "just like the Sims." The Krell technology was superior, yes, it was faster and stronger, but it was also interconnected. It was a hive mind network built on the assumption that no one would ever be brave enough or mad enough to step inside the beast's mouth. Elias wasn't trying to blow the ship up, yes, he knew he couldn't. Instead, he was doing something much more human. He was confusing it. On the bridge of the Krell ship, the displays began to flicker. The targeting computers, once locked on New York, suddenly shifted. They saw targets that didn't exist. They saw Krell ships where there was only empty space. "System failure!" the pilots shrieked. And then, out of the darkness of the lunar shadow, they appeared. They weren't ships in the way the Krell understood them. They were slabs of industrial tungsten strapped to the largest engines humanity could build. They were relativity slugs. No shields, no lasers, just mass and velocity. The humans hadn't spent the last month hiding. They had spent it building. Every factory on Earth had been converted. Every scrap of metal had been melted down. We didn't try to match the Krell's elegance. We embraced our brutality. The first slug hit the Great Herald at 0.05% of the speed of light. It didn't explode. It simply passed through the ship from one side to the other, leaving a vacuum-sealed hole 50 meters wide. Then came the second, and then the third. Back on Krell-Prime, Malakor watched the feed from the Sol system go dark. For the first time in 10,000 years, the king felt a cold prickle of something he didn't recognize. "Report!" he roared. "The vanguard is gone, my king," the vizier whispered, his mandibles trembling. "The humans, they didn't fight us. They threw their own moon's rocks at us. They used gravity as a whetstone." Malakor stood, his massive frame casting a shadow over the throne room. "Assemble the entire High Fleet, every ship, every warrior. We will not merely conquer Earth, we will erase the memory of it. I will personally lead the assault." The Krell mobilized on a scale never before seen. Thousands of ships warmed their warp drives. The very atmosphere of Krell-Prime began to glow from the sheer thermal output of the Armada. They were ready to end the human nuisance once and for all. Malakor stepped onto his flagship, the Invictus. He looked out at the stars, ready to command the jump. "Initiate warp," he ordered. "My king," the navigator said, his voice barely a squeak, "we cannot. The warp well is blocked." "Blocked by what?" "By them." Malakor looked at the view screen. The space surrounding Krell-Prime, the very heart of the Empire, was no longer empty. It started with 1, then 10, then hundreds. Small, boxy ships, painted in the matte black of the deep void. They didn't have the golden filigree of the Krell. They didn't have the glowing majesty of an ancient empire. They looked like predators. They looked like they were built in a hurry by people who were very, very angry. The humans hadn't stayed at Earth to defend. They had followed the warp trail of the Great Herald back to its source. While Malakor was looking at Earth, humanity was looking at his front door. And we hadn't come alone. Floating alongside the human ships were the battered, scarred vessels of the species the Krell had oppressed for centuries. The Thrax, the Valians, the Orizon. They had been waiting for someone to show them that the Krell could bleed. Humanity had given them the one thing Malakor couldn't conquer: hope. The silence on the bridge of the Invictus was absolute. Malakor looked out at the swarm. To a Krell, battle was an equation of energy output versus shield integrity. By those metrics, these human ships were jokes, flying coffins of iron and wire. But there was a terrifying rhythm to their arrival. They didn't jump in with the loud, peacock-strutting flare of Krell warp drives. They slipped in like shadows, their hulls cold and their signatures dampened. "How many?" Malakor asked, his voice a low vibration that shook the deck plates. 4,000 signatures, my king," the navigator replied, "but they are locking together." On the view screen, the human ships began to maneuver. They weren't staying in a traditional delta formation. They were connecting. Massive magnetic tethers snapped into place, linking the boxy human vessels into a gargantuan jagged ring that began to encircle the entire orbital path of Krell-Prime. It was a cage, a blockade made of sheer, stubborn grit. "They are madness personified," the High Vizier hissed. "They have bypassed our frontier garrisons. They have left their own world undefended just to reach us. We can incinerate them from the surface." "No," Malakor whispered, his eyes narrowing. "Look at their trajectory." The humans weren't firing. They were broadcasting. Not a demand, not a threat, but a sound. It was a recording of a heartbeat, a single, steady human pulse, amplified across every frequency, thumping against the hulls of the Krell fleet. It was the sound of a species that refused to be quiet. And then the first human voice broke the transmission. It wasn't a general, it wasn't a politician, it was a woman, her voice calm and weary. "This is the United Earth Fleet. To the citizens of the Krell Empire, your king told you we were a liability to be erased. He told you we were soft. We are here to show you that we are not soft. We are inevitable." The human ring ignited, not with weapons, but with engines. 4,000 ships burned their thrusters simultaneously, creating a literal halo of fire around the planet. They were moving the ring. They were descending.
The descent was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The humans didn't drop bombs, they dropped themselves. The boxy ships detached from the ring and entered the atmosphere of Krell-Prime like falling stars. The Krell surface-to-air batteries opened fire. The sky turned into a tapestry of purple plasma and white-hot human debris. But for every human ship that was blown to scrap, 3 more slammed into the obsidian spires of the capital. They didn't use parachutes. They used retro-rockets and kinetic dampeners at the very last second, burying the noses of their ships into the streets of the alien city. From the wreckage, the humans emerged. They weren't the giants the Krell were. They didn't have chitinous armor or 4 arms. They wore pressurized suits and carried rifles that spat lead and fire. But it was the way they moved that froze the Krell defenders. They moved with a desperate, frantic energy, a human pace. They didn't wait for orders. They didn't move in lockstep. They moved like a flood, flowing around obstacles, breaching doors with improvised explosives, and screaming in a language that sounded like a storm. Malakor watched from his throne room as the security feeds went dark one by one. The humans were inside the palace. "Protect the king!" the vizier screamed, drawing a jagged plasma blade. The heavy doors of the throne room, doors that had stood for 6,000 years, made of a metal that could withstand a nuclear blast, didn't open. They didn't melt. They were simply pushed. A human demolition team had placed shaped charges at the hinges, but the hinges weren't what gave way. The stone around them did. The doors fell inward with a crash that deafened every creature in the room. Through the dust walked a squad of humans. They were covered in the soot of the city and the grime of the journey. In the center was a man who looked older than the others. His suit was patched with silver tape, and he carried a helmet under one arm. He looked at the king, not with fear, not even with hatred, but with a profound, exhausted disappointment. "You're Malakor?" the man asked. His voice was raspy from the smoke. I am the Eternal, the king spat, his 4 eyes glowing with malice. You are a parasite in my house. You have surrounded my throne, yes, but you cannot kill an empire. The man took a step forward, his boots crunching on the glass fragments of the palace windows. We didn't come here to kill your empire, Malakor. We came here to show you what you're missing. The man reached into a pouch on his belt. The Krell guards lunged, but Malakor raised a hand to stop them. He was curious. He wanted to see what weapon this primate would use at the end of the world. The human pulled out a small portable projector. He clicked a button, and a holographic image filled the center of the throne room. It wasn't a map of Earth's defenses. It wasn't a list of demands. It was a video of a Krell colony world, a mining outpost called Secundus. The video showed human soldiers, the very same ones who had just fought their way through the palace, standing side by side with Krell laborers. The humans were sharing their rations. They were using their medical kits to patch up the wounds of the enemy. They were teaching the Krell children how to play a game with a ball made of rags. You see assets and liabilities. We see people. Even you, the human said softly. Weakness. You feed those who would kill you. You waste resources on the conquered. This is why you will eventually fail. Is it? The human asked, pointing to the windows. Malakor looked out. High above the city, the human ships were no longer burning their engines. They were venting oxygen and fuel in a specific pattern, a signal. And from the darkness of the city below, the Krell citizens began to emerge, not with weapons, but with white cloths. They were looking up at the humans in the sky, not as invaders, but as deliverers. The king's own people were laying down their arms, not because they were afraid of the human rifles, but because they were enamored by the human heart. You demanded submission, the human said, stepping right up to the base of the throne. But you forgot that submission is a fragile thing. It breaks the moment someone offers a hand instead of a fist. We didn't just surround your throne with ships, Malakor. We surrounded it with a better idea. Malakor the Eternal sat back. For the first time in his long, bloody life, the weight of his crown felt unbearable. He looked at the human, this frail creature who should have been a footnote in history, and he saw the spark of something ancient and terrifyingly bright. "What do you want?" the king asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The same thing we've wanted since we first looked at the stars, a seat at the table, not as subjects, as equals. And if you can't manage that, well, we've already shown you we're very good at rearranging the furniture." The human squad didn't execute the king. They didn't loot the palace. They simply stood guard until the transition of power began, until the Krell's own people, led by those who had seen the humanity in their enemies, took the reins of their own destiny. The human fleet eventually withdrew from Krell-Prime. They went back to their small blue marble, leaving behind a galaxy that had been permanently tilted on its axis. The Krell Empire didn't fall in a day. It changed. It learned. It began to value the soft things, the art, the compassion, the irrational bravery of a species that would travel across the void just to say no. And as the last human ship entered warp, the survivors on the ground looked up. They didn't see a conqueror. They saw a teacher. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars. Together, we will continue to explore the heights of the human spirit. Until next time, keep looking up.